Chantal, is there anything that Dr. Offit could tell you to change your mind?
Absolutely not. There's no concern. I already know that to a certain extent my child is already predisposed to a lot of other things on my husband's side of the family as well as some of mine. There's no way that I would give my child six shots at one time regardless. I do want to say to Dr. Offit,
So let me just ask you, so even if his studies are correct and you admit or go back and research what he's saying to be true.
I do not put any faith into anything that my government tells me. I know that may sound absolutely absurd, but there's no independent studies done. And the day that I rest, and feel that I can, sit back and let a pharmaceutical company say what they feel is correct, and they're going to tell the CDC and everything else, all of our studies say everything is fine, when look at all the other drugs that have been recalled. There have been vaccines that have been recalled because of the different things, that have been found faulty in them.
So do you not believe in the system of testing drugs? Is that what you're saying?
Not when there are no independent studies done. The day that an fully independent, where a pharmaceutical company, even Dr. Offit, he is paid millions by the pharmaceutical company. He's made his own vaccine. Good for him. But there is no way I will sit there and completely rely on that
drug companies. But the drug companies are the ones that do the test.
Never been any
but
independent
Chantal,
studies done.
The drug companies are the ones that test the drugs.
Well, exactly, and I think that the government should have a say and say, well, fine, we're going to form our own independent people and do it on our own.
But you just said you don't trust anything the government does.
As far as what the pharmaceutical companies is telling them, that's correct. So the day that the government, if they put aside money, their own money, and say we're going to do this on our own to protect the children of this country and their grandchildren.
If you're saying the government does that.
Yes, if the government does that.
Paul, can the government do that?
Well, actually, a number of interesting issues were raised. First of all, Chantal describes a number of facts that are simply incorrect. I don't make millions I'll go through them. One, I don't make millions of dollars to speak about the safety of vaccines. I make nothing to speak about the safety of vaccines.
No,
Two, and let me finish, Chantal. You just spoke. Please let me finish. Two is that if you spend 10 minutes talking to any of the people involved at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or frankly pharmaceutical companies who do the research that does the phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 3 safety testing for vaccines, I think you'd feel very confident about the process. I think the fact that you are distant to the process means that you're much more likely to view it with suspicion, but it's an unreasonable suspicion, because what the Food and Drug Administration requires for a vaccine is a very high bar. I mean, if you look, for example, at safety testing for the pneumococcal vaccine, was tested in 40,000 children pre-licensure. The rotavirus vaccine, 70,000 children pre-licensure. The HPV vaccine, 30,000 women for 7 years pre-licensure. I would argue no drug is subjected to that sort of pre-licensure safety testing, nor are the catchment systems for drugs nearly as good as they are for vaccines. I think it's a tremendous system. I think vaccines are, frankly, the safest, best tested things we put in our body because of those systems.
We're talking about vaccines this hour on Talk of the Nation Science Friday from NPR News. And so I go back to you again, Chantal. I'm just wondering if you just have a preconceived notion about this, and your mind made up that no amount of evidence, even if the government panel that you say you'd like came back and said it was safe, would that still be good enough for you?
If it, like I said, if there's evidence that shows that there have been complete independent studies done, that's something totally different. But I'm not going to put my faith into a pharmaceutical company who is making millions off of this stuff.
Well, this is how our system works. I may agree with you on a certain level, but this is how all drug testing goes.
Vaccines are bad. I'm saying 6 at one time is absurd.
Okay.
It's not absurd, Chantal, because if you look, frankly, when a child is in the womb, for example, they're in a sterile environment. Once they enter the birth canal and then enter the world, they're not in a sterile environment anymore. And the number of bacteria that live on the surface of their nose or throat or intestine are literally in the trillions. Each of those bacteria has between 2,000 or 6,000 immunological components, and as a consequence, our body makes grams of antibodies to try and and combat these bacteria to make sure that they just stay on the surfaces of our body and don't enter into the lymphatics or bloodstream. The number of immunological challenges contained in vaccines is not figuratively, it is literally a drop in the ocean of what you typically encounter and manage every day. I mean, I certainly understand how any parent who lies a child down on that crinkly white paper and watches the child, receive 4 or 5 injections at once can feel like it's too much. I mean, that makes sense.
Okay,
if you want to really scare yourself, Chantel, what you should do is take a cotton swab and just swab the inside of a child's nose, put it on a microscope slide, and look at it under the microscope. It's teeming with bacteria, to which one makes an immune response. Frankly, a single ear infection or a single cold is a greater immunological challenge than are all the vaccines that children receive. So it's just not a reasoned fear.
So tell me, how many studies, regardless of whether they're independent, done by the CDC or by the pharmaceutical companies, have been done on vaccine loading, which means 5 or 6 vaccines at one time? How many?
I would say in the probably somewhere in the vicinity of the high hundreds to low thousands. If you look, for example, at any new vaccine that gets licensed in the United States, you have to do by definition, by FDA requirement, something called concomitant use studies, which is to say, for example, if a new HPV vaccine comes onto the market or a rotavirus vaccine comes onto the market, you have to show that that vaccine does not interfere with the immune response or the safety of existing vaccines, and similarly, that existing vaccines don't interfere with the safety or immune response of that new vaccine. That has to be done for every new vaccine. So concomitant use studies are the way to answer the question, can children receive all these vaccines at once safely?
Thank you, Chantal. And you can see why, Paul. I don't think there's anything that you can say to some people who are convinced. Her last answer was, "I don't believe that."
Right,
you can see the problem with vaccinations right there, or to getting people to get their kids immunized.
I agree. I mean, all you can do to try and calm fears is to try and present, data in a reasoned manner. But, if someone's going to say, I think that basically there's a conspiracy to sell vaccines, that pharmaceutical companies and the government and people who speak about vaccines like me are all part of that massive conspiracy, then you're obviously not going to be convincing. But I honestly think that Chantel doesn't represent most parents. I think most parents, frankly, read things in the media or hear about things, on radio shows and are concerned but are reassurable with good science. I do believe that's true of most parents.
All right, Paul, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. Paul Offit is Chief of the Division of Infectious Diseases at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and author of Autism's False Prophets, Bad Science, Risky Medicine, and a Search for a Cure, out today. We're going to take a break and totally switch gears, talk about the Large Hadron Collider. Boy, is it large and colliding. Stay with us. We'll talk about it after this break. I'm Ira Flato. This is Talk of the Nation Science Friday from NPR News.